Joseph Kane, billionaire titan of Kane Enterprises, gripped a cream-colored wedding invitation, its gold script gleaming like a taunt. It was from Rachel Whitmore, the ex-fiancée who'd shattered his heart 3 years ago, leaving him for a CEO who shared her vision. Now she was flaunting her new life with this lavish vineyard wedding. "Is she mocking me?" Joseph muttered, tossing the envelope onto his mahogany desk. His business partner, Marcus Reed, glanced at it and smirked. "She's counting on you to hide, man. You going?" Joseph's jaw tightened, a dry chuckle escaping. "Show up alone? Not a chance. I need to make a statement." The idea wasn't just to attend. It was to turn heads, to make Rachel question everything. That night, driving through a rain-soaked city, Joseph's mind churned with possibilities. At a red light, he spotted her, a woman huddled under a bus stop bench, clutching a worn backpack, her cardboard sign reading, "Will work for food." She was drenched, her clothes threadbare, but her eyes held a quiet fire, unbowed by the storm. Something, guilt, curiosity, or fate, made Joseph pull over. He lowered his tinted window. "You shouldn't be out here in this rain," he said. She looked up, her gaze sharp, cutting through his polished exterior. "And you shouldn't be chatting up strangers at red lights." Joseph smirked, caught off guard. "What's your name?" "Aisha," she said, voice steady despite the chill. "Aisha Lawson." "Come with me," he blurted, surprising himself. "I'll get you a warm meal. My beautiful family, let's start with a blessing. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now, let us begin." Aisha studied him, then nodded, her movements deliberate, like she was the one taking a risk on him. In the quiet glow of a downtown diner, Aisha sat across from Joseph, her backpack a shield at her side. She ate with focus, no flattery, no desperation, just a woman who hadn't eaten in days. "So," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "what's a guy in a $6,000 suit doing buying dinner for someone like me?" Joseph leaned back, disarmed by her directness. "Call it an impulse." "Impulse?" She raised an eyebrow. "Charity doesn't stare like you're trying to solve a puzzle." Her words stung, and he laughed to cover it. "You're sharp. Life sharpens you," she shot back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He stared at her, an idea sparking, wild, reckless, perfect. "Want to make $10,000? He asked. Aisha froze, fork midair. "For what?" "Coming to a wedding with me." Her eyes narrowed, amusement flickering. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Joseph said. "I need someone who'll shake things up." "You're it." She leaned forward, studying him like he was the one under a microscope. "You want to rattle your ex?" "Maybe," he admitted, grinning. "Think you're up for it?" Aisha's lips curved, a challenge in her gaze. 10,000. And I picked the dress. Joseph laughed, a real one this time. "Deal." In his sleek Bentley, Aisha sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the city lights blurring past. She wasn't nervous, not awed, just watchful, like she was measuring the world. Joseph glanced at her, expecting questions, but she was silent. "Not curious where we're headed?" he asked. She turned, her smile sly. "Somewhere fancy, I'm guessing." "A wedding, right?" He blinked, caught off guard again. "How'd you know?" "You've got that look," she said, her voice low, knowing. "A man with a score to settle." Joseph's grip tightened on the wheel. Who was this woman, reading him like an open book? As the city lights faded behind them, Joseph's mind drifted to the past, to the glittering engagement party 3 years ago, where Rachel had promised forever, only to leave him humiliated days before their wedding. The memory stung like a fresh wound. Rachel's radiant smile as she toasted their future, the whispers of New York's elite, and then her cold note, left on his desk, explaining she'd found someone who understood her dreams. Now, in the quiet hum of his Bentley, Joseph glanced at Aisha Lawson, her silhouette sharp against the window, and wondered what the hell he was doing. Aisha sat still, her backpack on her lap like a shield, her eyes tracing the city's blur. She hadn't spoken since her quip about his score to settle, and her silence unnerved him. Most people filled the air with chatter, flattery, questions, anything to please a man like him. Not her. She was a puzzle, and Joseph wasn't sure he wanted to solve it or run from it. "So," he said, breaking the quiet, "you're not going to ask about this wedding?" Aisha turned, her gaze steady, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "What's to ask? You're a rich guy with a chip on his shoulder, dragging me to some fancy event to stick it to your ex. Am I close?" Joseph's fingers tightened on the wheel. "You're not wrong," he admitted, his voice low. "But it's more than that. Rachel's crowd, they think they own the world. I want to walk in there with someone who'll make them question everything." She raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering. "And you think I'm that someone? A stranger you found under a bus stop?" "You're not just a stranger," he said, surprising himself. "You've got presence. You don't shrink, even in that rain-soaked coat." Aisha's smirk faded, her eyes searching his. "Flattery doesn't work on me, Joseph. What's the real play here? You want to make her jealous, don't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Partly. But mostly, I want to show up on my terms. You in or out?" She leaned back, her fingers tapping her backpack. $10,000 is a lot of money," she said slowly. "But I'm not here to play your arm candy. If I do this, I do it my way." "Meaning?" "Meaning I don't pretend to be someone I'm not," she said, her voice firm. "You want me to shake things up? Fine. But I'm not your puppet." Joseph grinned, a spark of admiration flaring. "Fair enough. You've got a deal." Her eyes held his for a moment, and he saw something shift. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper, something she wasn't ready to share. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have picked anyone. Models, actresses, someone who fits your world." He shrugged, dodging the question. "I told you. You're unpredictable. That's what I need." Aisha didn't buy it, but she let it go, her gaze drifting back to the window. In the silence, her mind slipped to a memory she'd buried deep. Her mother, Grace, laughing in their tiny apartment, papers spread across the table as she worked late for Whitmore Development. Aisha had been 16, proud of her mother's hustle, unaware that Rachel Whitmore's company was cutting corners, skimming funds meant for affordable housing. When the project collapsed, so did their lives, eviction, shelters, and eventually the street. Grace's heart gave out a year later, leaving Aisha alone. Now, Rachel's name on that invitation burned in Aisha's chest. She wasn't just here for the money. She wanted Rachel to see her, to face the wreckage her greed had left behind. The Bentley pulled up to a sleek high-rise, home to Joseph's personal stylist. "We're here," he said, cutting the engine. "Tomorrow, you meet my team. They'll get you ready." Aisha's jaw tightened. "Ready? You mean make me look like I belong in your world?" "No," he said quickly, catching her tone. "To make you look like you. Only polished." She snorted softly. "Polished? Right." She stepped out, clutching her backpack, her boots leaving faint wet marks on the pavement. Joseph followed, his polished shoes clicking beside her. Inside the stylist's studio, the air smelled of lavender and money. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting racks of gowns and a team of assistants who froze when Aisha walked in. Their eyes flicked from her torn jacket to her steady gaze, and she felt the weight of their judgment. The lead stylist, a wiry man named Claude, raised an eyebrow. "This is your guest, Mr. Kane?" "Aisha Lawson," she said before Joseph could answer, her voice cutting through the room. "And I'm not wearing anything that screams Billionaire Barbie." Claude blinked, then recovered with a tight smile. "Of course. Let's find something authentic." Joseph watched, leaning against a wall, as Aisha moved through the racks. She rejected a sequined gown, too flashy, and a frilly dress. Finally, she paused at a black velvet gown, simple but elegant, its lines sharp like her own edges. "This," she said, holding it up. "This works." Claude nodded, impressed despite himself. "Bold choice. It suits you." As Aisha disappeared behind a curtain to try it on, Joseph's phone buzzed. "Marcus, texting. Asterisk, you sure about this?" "She's not one of us." Asterisk, Joseph typed back. "Exactly." But as he pocketed his phone, doubt crept in. Was this plan just petty revenge, a way to rub Rachel's nose in his defiance? Or was it something else, something about Aisha's fire, her refusal to bow, that made him want her by his side? He thought of Rachel's betrayal again, the way she'd dismissed him as too rigid for her dreams. He'd built Kane Enterprises into a global force, but it hadn't been enough for her. Aisha, though, she didn't care about his wealth. She'd called him out in a diner, seen through his facade in minutes. Why did that draw him in? The curtain rustled, and Aisha stepped out. The black velvet hugged her frame, her hair pulled back to reveal eyes that held the room captive. Joseph's breath caught. She wasn't just polished. She was commanding, a woman who could silence a crowd without a word. Claude clapped his hands, delighted, but Aisha's gaze locked on Joseph. "Well?" she asked, her tone daring him to comment. He swallowed, searching for words. "You look like you could steal the whole damn wedding." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Good. Because I'm not here to blend in." Joseph felt a jolt, not just of anticipation, but of something deeper. Respect, maybe, or the stirrings of a connection he hadn't expected. "You won't," he said softly. "Trust me." Aisha tilted her head, studying him again. "Trust you? I don't even know you, Joseph Kane." She paused, her voice lowering. "But I'm starting to think you don't know yourself either." He froze, her words slicing through his confidence. Before he could respond, she turned back to the mirror, leaving him to wonder what he'd gotten himself into, and who this woman really was. Aisha's words lingered in the air like a challenge. "I'm starting to think you don't know yourself either." Joseph stood frozen in the stylist's studio, her gaze pinning him as she turned back to the mirror. The sleek Manhattan high-rise buzzed around them, mirrors reflecting racks of gowns and the skeptical eyes of Claude's team. But Aisha's presence cut through it all. Joseph felt the ground shift beneath him, his plan to upstage Rachel suddenly feeling smaller than the woman before him. Claude, the lead stylist, clapped his hands, breaking the tension. "Right, let's get started," he said. His tone clipped as he eyed Aisha's torn jacket and scuffed boots. His assistants exchanged glances, their whispers barely concealed. "This is unconventional," one murmured, adjusting a tray of combs. Aisha caught it, her lips twitching, but she said nothing, her silence louder than their judgment. "Unconventional's the point," Joseph said, his voice sharper than intended. He leaned against a mirrored wall, arms crossed, watching as Claude guided Aisha to a velvet-cushioned chair. She sat with the same poise she'd carried at the diner, her backpack at her feet like a sentinel. Joseph couldn't shake her earlier words. Did he know himself? 3 years ago, he'd been Rachel's perfect match, polished, driven, untouchable. Now, he was orchestrating a stunt with a woman he'd met at a bus stop. Was this revenge, or was he chasing something else? Aisha's reflection met his in the mirror, her eyes sharp. "You're staring again," she said, a teasing edge softening her tone. "Second thoughts?" "Not a chance," he shot back, forcing a grin. "Just wondering how you'll handle this circus." She raised an eyebrow. "Better than you, I bet." Claude interrupted, holding up a shimmering gold gown. "This would be stunning," he said, his enthusiasm practiced. Aisha tilted her head, unimpressed. "Too loud," she said. "I'm not here to sparkle for them." The assistant nearby stifled a snort, and Claude's smile tightened. "Something more, understated, then?" He gestured to a rack of dresses, each more extravagant than the last. Aisha stood, moving to the racks with a quiet authority that made the room pause. She ran her fingers over fabrics, rejecting a frilly pink dress. "I'm not a dessert," and a beaded monstrosity, "looks like a chandelier." Then she stopped at a black velvet gown, its lines sleek and commanding, like a blade wrapped in silk. "This," she said, holding it up. "This is me." Claude's eyes widened, but he nodded. "Bold. It suits you." As Aisha disappeared behind a curtain to change, Joseph's mind drifted to her earlier question. Why me? He dodged it, but the truth was unsettling. Aisha wasn't just unpredictable. She was real, raw in a way his world rarely allowed. He thought of Rachel's polished perfection, her calculated charm. Aisha was the opposite, and it drew him in like a moth to flame. Behind the curtain, Aisha stood alone, the velvet gown cool against her skin. She stared at her reflection, her calloused hands smoothing the fabric. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, but her eyes were the same, eyes that had seen her mother's dreams crumble. Grace had worked late nights at Whitmore Development, believing in a better future, only for Rachel's greed to strip it away. Aisha had survived the streets, the shelters, the hunger, but this moment, dressing up to face the woman who'd ruined her life, felt like a betrayal of her mother's memory. Was she playing Joseph's game, or her own? She clenched her fists, grounding herself. She'd do this for the money, for the shelter she'd build, for the chance to look Rachel in the eyes and show her what survived. The curtain parted, and Aisha stepped out. The room went still. The black velvet clung to her like a second skin, her hair swept into elegant curls that framed her face. Her eyes, fierce and unflinching, held the weight of a queen. Joseph's breath caught, his heart stuttering. She wasn't just beautiful, she was a force, a woman who could command a room without trying. "You clean up well," he said, his voice quieter than he meant. Aisha's lips curved, a spark of mischief in her gaze. "You mean I look like someone worth sitting beside you?" The words hit like a dart, and Joseph's smile faltered. "That's not what I meant," he said, but the truth stung. He'd brought her here to make a statement, but now he saw her, not as a prop, but as a woman who outshone his plan. "You look incredible." "I know," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "But it's what everyone else will think that matters, right?" Claude clapped, breaking the moment. "Perfection. We'll accessorize minimally, let the gown speak." His assistant scurried, offering diamond necklaces and stilettos, but Aisha waved them off. "Simple earrings," she said. "And flats. I need to move, not teeter." One assistant, a young woman with a pinched expression, muttered, "She's particular, isn't she?" Aisha turned, her smile sharp. "Particular's what happens when you've had to choose between food and shoes. You learn what matters." The assistant flushed, and Joseph felt a pang of guilt. He'd brought Aisha into this world of scrutiny, where every glance was a judgment. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't have to do this if it's too much. Aisha met his gaze, unflinching. I'm here, aren't I? But don't think this is just about your ex. I've got my own reasons. He frowned, curiosity flaring. Care to share? Not yet, she said, turning back to the mirror. Let's just say I'm not here to play nice. Joseph watched her, the weight of her words settling in. She wasn't just defying him. She was defying the entire world he'd pulled her into. He thought of his own reasons. The need to prove he'd moved on, to silence the whispers that had followed him since Rachel's betrayal. But Aisha's fire made his motives feel small, almost petty. What was she carrying that burned so fiercely? Claude's team finished, and Aisha stood ready, her presence filling the studio. Joseph's phone buzzed. Marcus again. Hope you know what you're doing. He ignored it, his eyes on Aisha. Ready to head to the vineyard? He asked. She nodded, slinging her backpack over her shoulder, the contrast between it and the gown almost comical. Let's go, she said, her voice steady but laced with something fierce. As they walked to the Bentley, the city lights glinting off its sleek frame, Aisha paused, turning to him. Don't expect me to play nice if they don't, she said, her eyes glinting with challenge. I'm not here to make friends. Joseph's pulse quickened, a mix of admiration and unease. Noted, he said, opening the car door. As she slid inside, he realized he wasn't just bringing a date to Rachel's wedding. He was unleashing a storm. Aisha's warning hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. Don't expect me to play nice if they don't. Joseph's pulse thrummed as he closed the Bentley's door, the vineyard's golden lights spilling across the gravel drive. Aisha stepped out, her black velvet gown catching the glow, her backpack slung defiantly over one shoulder. The contrast was striking. Elegance and grit, a queen with a past she refused to hide. Joseph felt a surge of something unfamiliar, not just anticipation but pride, as they walked toward the wedding that would change everything. The vineyard was a vision of opulence, its sprawling vines draped in twinkling lights, tables adorned with crystal and orchids, the air thick with the scent of wine and wealth. New York's elite milled about, socialites in couture, CEOs with practiced smiles, their laughter a symphony of privilege. Joseph knew these people, their whispers still sharp from 3 years ago when Rachel left him. Tonight, though, their eyes weren't on him. They were on Aisha. She moved like she belonged, her chin high, her steps deliberate. The crowd parted subtly, heads turning, murmurs rippling like wind through the vines. Who is she? A woman in diamonds whispered. An heiress? Another guest, eyeing Aisha's gown. Some actress, maybe, a man muttered, sipping champagne. Aisha's presence was a magnet, her poise a silent command that drowned out the orchestra. Joseph watched, his chest tightening. This wasn't what he'd planned. He'd wanted to unsettle Rachel, but Aisha was rewriting the script, stealing the spotlight without trying. At the altar, Rachel stood radiant in lace, her groom, Ethan Caldwell, smirking beside her. Her smile was a perfect mask, but when her gaze landed on Joseph and Aisha, it faltered, a crack in her porcelain facade. Joseph felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it faded as he glanced at Aisha. She wasn't here for his petty revenge. Her eyes, fixed on Rachel, burned with something deeper, something that made his own motives feel small. Rachel approached, her heels clicking on the stone path, her smile stitched back into place. "Joseph," she said, her voice honeyed but tight, "I didn't think you'd come." Her eyes slid to Aisha, appraising, probing. "And you've brought a guest." "Aisha Lawson," Aisha said, her tone smooth as silk, her gaze unflinching. "Congratulations, Rachel. It's a beautiful day for a wedding." Rachel's smile twitched, caught off guard by Aisha's confidence. "Thank you," she said, her voice a touch cooler. "I don't believe we've met." Are you a friend of Joseph's? Aisha's lips curved, cryptic and sharp. Something like that. Let's just say I'm here to enjoy the show. Joseph stifled a grin, his admiration swelling. Rachel's eyes narrowed, searching Aisha's face as if trying to place her. Well, she said, forcing a laugh, you certainly make an entrance. Where did you two meet? Oh, you know, Aisha said, her tone light but laced with steel. Sometimes life throws you together in the most unexpected places. She tilted her head, her eyes locking onto Rachel's. Like a rainy night or a failed housing project. The words were subtle, a dagger wrapped in velvet, and Rachel's smile froze. Joseph's pulse spiked. He didn't know the full story, but he felt the weight of Aisha's jab. Rachel recovered quickly, laughing it off. How charming, she said, her voice brittle. Enjoy the evening. She turned away, her posture stiff, her groom trailing her like a shadow. Joseph leaned closer to Aisha, his voice low. You're playing with fire. She met his gaze, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Good. Let it burn. He couldn't look away, captivated by her grace under pressure. He'd come here to reclaim his dignity, to show Rachel he'd moved on, but Aisha's presence shifted the ground beneath him. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about standing beside someone who made him want to be better. Her strength, her refusal to shrink under the elite's scrutiny, made him question the man he'd become. 3 years ago, he'd let Rachel's betrayal define him. Now, watching Aisha navigate this gilded cage, he saw a chance to redefine himself. They moved through the crowd, Aisha's poise drawing more whispers. A media mogul tried to engage her, his tone patronizing. You must tell me your story, he said, swirling his wine. Not every day we see a fresh face like yours. Aisha's smile was a blade. My story. It's not one you'd understand over champagne. The mogul blinked, caught off guard, and Joseph bit back a laugh. She was untouchable, turning their assumptions into dust with every word. As they reached a quieter corner near a fountain, Joseph felt a protective instinct stir. You're handling this better than I expected, he said, his voice soft. Better than me, maybe. Aisha glanced at him, her expression softening for the first time. I've faced worse crowds than this, she said. Shelters, soup kitchens, people judge you there too. At least here, I've got a dress. Her words hit him like a punch. He'd brought her into this world, knowing it would judge her, and yet she stood taller than anyone here. I'm sorry, he said, the words slipping out, for putting you in their crosshairs. She studied him, her gaze piercing. You didn't put me anywhere. I chose this. Remember that. He nodded, a weight settling in his chest. She wasn't his pawn. She was his equal, maybe more. The realization made his heart race, not with the thrill of the game, but with something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. The music swelled, signaling the reception's start, and Joseph guided Aisha to their table. The crowd's eyes followed, their curiosity a living thing. He felt a surge of pride, not just in her, but in standing beside her. She wasn't here to play a role. She was rewriting the rules, and he was caught in her orbit. But as they sat, a voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Aisha, a woman in a sapphire gown, her face vaguely familiar, approached, her brow furrowed. Is that you? I think I saw you at the downtown shelter last month. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading. Nearby guests turned, their whispers sharpening. Shelter, one murmured. Is she homeless? Another hissed, eyes wide with scandal. Aisha's posture didn't waver, but Joseph saw the flicker in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or resolve. His stomach twisted, a protective urge flaring. He opened his mouth to intervene, but Aisha's hand brushed his arm, a silent signal. She turned to the woman, her smile calm but deadly. You must be mistaken, she said, her voice steady. But I'm flattered you think I'm memorable. The woman hesitated, thrown by Aisha's composure, and retreated with a nervous laugh. But the whispers grew, a current of doubt threatening to unravel her facade. Joseph leaned closer, his voice urgent. You okay? Aisha's eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. Let them talk, she said. I'm not here for them. Aisha's words cut through the vineyard's golden glow. Let them talk. I'm not here for them. Joseph's heart pounded as the whispers about her possible homeless past rippled through the crowd, their eyes glinting with scandal. Aisha stood unwavering, her black velvet gown a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of Rachel's wedding reception. The orchestra swelled, and Joseph, still reeling from her defiance, extended his hand. Dance with me, he said, his voice low, a mix of instinct and need to shield her from the crowd's gaze. Aisha's eyes flickered with surprise, but she took his hand, her touch steady despite the storm brewing around them. They moved to the dance floor, the crowd parting like water, their stares heavy with curiosity. Joseph's hand rested lightly on her waist, her warmth grounding him as they swayed to a slow waltz. The chemistry between them crackled, unspoken but palpable, her presence filling the space more than the music. Guests watched, their whispers now tinged with envy, and Joseph caught Rachel's gaze from across the room. Her smile tight, her eyes narrowing as Aisha moved with effortless grace. You're enjoying this too much, Aisha whispered, her breath warm against his ear, a teasing edge cutting through her seriousness. Joseph's lips twitched. Can you blame me? You're stealing the show. Her eyes glinted, but there was a weight behind them. Careful, Kane. This isn't your stage. He tightened his grip slightly, caught in her orbit. He'd come here to unsettle Rachel, to reclaim his pride, but Aisha's strength was rewriting his script. She wasn't just his date. She was a force, and he was starting to see the wedding through her eyes, not his own. As the song ended, Rachel approached, her lace gown shimmering, her groom trailing like an afterthought. Her smile was a blade, sharp and calculated. Joseph, she said, her voice saccharine, you've outdone yourself tonight, bringing such a unique guest. Her eyes slid to Aisha, lingering on the velvet gown with a faint sneer. It's almost like you're collecting charity cases now. The crowd nearby went quiet, glasses pausing mid-sip. Joseph's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Aisha stepped forward, her smile serene but deadly. Funny, she said, her voice clear, carrying over the hush. I'd say the real charity case is anyone who thinks cutting corners on people's homes is a personality trait. The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the guests, and Rachel's face paled, her composure cracking. Joseph stared at Aisha, stunned by the precision of her jab. The crowd didn't know the full context, but the mention of cutting corners hit Rachel like a dart, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. I don't know what you mean, Rachel said, her voice tight, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the edge of her veil. Sure you do, Aisha said, her tone light but unyielding. Some projects fail, but some people make them fail. Isn't that right, Mrs. Caldwell? Rachel's smile vanished, and Ethan, her groom, stepped forward, his smirk gone. That's enough, he said, but Aisha's gaze didn't waver, pinning Rachel in place. The crowd was riveted, their whispers now a low hum of shock. Rachel forced a laugh, turning away. Enjoy the party, she muttered, retreating with Ethan, her heels clicking like a metronome of defeat. Joseph turned to Aisha, his voice low. What was that about? She didn't answer, her eyes distant, fixed on the vineyard's horizon. Not here, she said, nodding toward the terrace. He followed her outside, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the reception's heat. The terrace overlooked sprawling vines, silvered by moonlight, the the distant hum of music fading. Aisha leaned against the stone railing, her backpack at her feet, a reminder of the world she'd come from. "What did you mean, Aisha?" Joseph pressed, standing beside her. "About Rachel's projects?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady but heavy with memory. "Rachel Whitmore ran a housing development company," she said. "My mother worked there, pouring her life into affordable housing projects. She believed in them, thought they'd give us a future. But Rachel cut costs, illegally, skirting regulations to pad her profits. When the project collapsed, so did our home. Eviction notices, shelters, the streets. My mother didn't survive it." Joseph's stomach dropped, the weight of her words crushing. "Aisha, I had no idea." "You wouldn't," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were her fiancé, not her conscience. But I knew who she was the moment you mentioned her name. That's why I'm here. Not just for your $10,000, but to look her in the eyes and let her see what her greed couldn't break." He stared at her, shock mingling with guilt. He'd brought her here for his own ego, to parade her as a statement, but she'd come for justice, for closure. Her strength humbled him, made his own pain feel trivial. "I'm sorry," he said, the words raw. "I didn't know what I was asking of you." Aisha turned to him, her eyes softening for the first time. "You didn't ask me to do anything, Joseph. I chose this. For me. For my mother." She paused, her voice quieter. "But you're here now, and that means something." Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with a new understanding. Joseph felt the ground shift again, his heart no longer racing with revenge, but with admiration, with a need to stand beside her, not behind her. He reached out, his hand brushing hers on the railing, a silent promise. "I'm with you," he said. "Whatever comes next." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Good. Because it's not over yet." Unseen, Rachel stood in the shadows near the terrace door, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. She'd followed them, drawn by Aisha's barb, and caught the tail end of their conversation. "My mother worked there." Aisha's voice echoed in her mind, stirring a memory, a name, a face, a project she'd buried years ago. Her eyes widened, suspicion dawning. Could it be? The woman from the streets, the one stealing her spotlight. Was she tied to that failure, that scandal she'd swept under the rug? Rachel's champagne flute trembled in her hand, her shadowed silhouette frozen near the terrace door as Aisha's words echoed. Let her see what her greed couldn't break. Suspicion coiled in Rachel's chest, her mind racing to connect Aisha to a past she'd buried. The vineyard's golden glow faded behind Joseph and Aisha as they returned to the reception, unaware of the storm brewing. The night had shifted something irrevocable, and as Joseph drove Aisha back to the city, the weight of her revelation settled between them like a quiet vow. By morning, the internet was ablaze. Photos of Aisha at the wedding, her black velvet gown glowing under the vineyard lights, her regal poise outshining Rachel's lace, flooded social media. #QueenFromNowhere trended, with users speculating wildly. Is she a secret heiress? A model? A diplomat's daughter? Paparazzi shots of her beside Joseph, her eyes fierce and unyielding, fueled the frenzy. Blogs dissected her gown, her posture, her mystery. "The Queen from Nowhere steals the show," one headline blared. Another, "Who is Joseph Kane's stunning plus one?" Aisha sat cross-legged on the sagging couch in her modest studio apartment, the $10,000 check from Joseph on the coffee table, her backpack at her feet. Her phone buzzed incessantly, reporters, influencers, even a modeling agency offering contracts. She ignored them all, her gaze fixed on a faded photo of her mother, Grace, tucked into a cracked frame. Grace had dreamed of a women's shelter, a place where no one would face the streets alone. Aisha's plan was clear. Use the money to start that shelter, to build what Rachel's greed had destroyed. The viral attention was a distraction, a spotlight she didn't want. She muted her phone, her resolve stealing. This isn't about fame, she muttered. It's about her. Across town, Joseph sat in his sleek office at Kane Enterprises, the city skyline glittering beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. His laptop glowed with articles about Aisha, each one amplifying her mystique. He'd wanted to make a statement, to unsettle Rachel, but Aisha had done more. She'd rewritten the narrative. Her strength, her purpose, made his initial motives feel shallow. He thought of her on the terrace, her voice breaking as she spoke of her mother's death, the streets that followed. He'd been blind to that world, his privilege a shield. Now he couldn't unsee it. He scrolled through his contacts, hesitating, then dialed Marcus. "I'm volunteering," he said without preamble. "At a shelter Aisha's starting." Marcus laughed, incredulous. "You? Serving soup? Man, who are you right now?" Joseph's jaw tightened. Someone who's done enough, standing on the sidelines. He hung up, his mind replaying Aisha's defiance, her refusal to bow to Rachel's world. He'd brought her to the wedding for his own ego, but now he wanted to be part of her mission. Not to atone, but to learn, to be more than the billionaire who'd stopped at a bus stop on a whim. At the shelter's early setup, a cramped storefront with peeling paint and folding tables, Aisha hammered nails into a bulletin board, her movements precise despite the chaos of volunteers unpacking donated supplies. Joseph arrived, his tailored suit out of place among the mismatched chairs. Aisha glanced up, her eyebrow arching. "You're late," she said, a teasing edge softening her tone. "Traffic," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Where do I start?" She handed him a paint roller, her eyes searching his. "You sure about this? It's not a photo op." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I'm here for you. For this." Her lips twitched, a flicker of warmth breaking through her guard. They worked side by side, painting walls and sorting donations, their banter light, but charged with unspoken trust. Joseph watched her direct volunteers with quiet authority, her vision for the shelter clear even in its infancy. He admired her selflessness, but a nagging guilt lingered. Had he used her, even unintentionally, to settle his own score? Meanwhile, Rachel sat in her penthouse, scrolling through the hashtag Queen from Nowhere posts with a scowl. Her wedding, meant to be her triumph, had been overshadowed by Aisha's enigmatic presence. The memory of Aisha's terrace revelation gnawed at her. Grace Lawson, a name from a project she'd buried after cutting corners to boost profits. Humiliated by Aisha's barb and the internet's obsession, Rachel acted on impulse. She called a tabloid contact, her voice low. "I've got a tip. That woman with Joseph Kane? She's a fraud, probably a grifter he picked up off the street." The story hit the next day. Billionaire's mystery date a homeless con artist? The article, thin on evidence but heavy on insinuation, spread like wildfire. Aisha saw it on a volunteer's phone at the shelter, her jaw tightening. "Let them talk," she said, echoing her words from the wedding, and turned back to hanging curtains. Her focus didn't waver, her mission outweighing the noise. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd survived the streets. Joseph, however, wasn't so calm. In his office, he slammed his laptop shut, the tabloid headline burning in his mind. Rachel's fingerprints were all over it. Her pettiness, her need to control the narrative. He thought of Aisha's strength, her shelter taking shape despite the odds, and felt a surge of protectiveness. He'd brought her into this mess, and now Rachel was trying to tear her down. He wouldn't let it stand. He grabbed his phone, his voice sharp as he left a message for his PR team. "Find out who leaked this. And get me everything on Rachel's old housing projects, now." He paused, his eyes narrowing. We're not letting her win this time. Joseph's voice was sharp as he left the message for his PR team. We're not letting her win this time. The tabloid's headline: Billionaire's mystery date a homeless con artist? Burned in his mind as he pocketed his phone. The city skyline beyond his office window, a stark contrast to the modest storefront where Aisha was building her dream. Rachel's smear campaign was a low blow, but Joseph felt a fire he hadn't known in years. Not for revenge, but for Aisha, for the shelter, for something bigger than himself. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, determined to stand by her side. The women's shelter, a cramped storefront in a gritty corner of the city, buzzed with purpose. Peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights couldn't dim Aisha's vision. She moved through the space like a conductor, directing volunteers as they set up cots, sorted donated clothes, and painted walls a soft blue. Her black velvet gown was gone, replaced by jeans and a worn t-shirt, but her presence was no less commanding. Women arriving for help, some with bruised faces, others with haunted eyes, looked to her with quiet trust. Aisha greeted each one by name, her warmth cutting through their fear. Joseph watched from the doorway, a box of donated books in his arms, struck by her ability to turn chaos into hope. "You gonna stand there all day, Kane, or help?" Aisha called, her tone teasing but her eyes warm. She tossed him a paintbrush, and he caught it, rolling up his sleeves. The volunteers glanced at him. Joseph Kane, billionaire, painting walls in a rundown shelter. But Aisha's ease made it feel natural. "Where do you want me?" he asked, stepping closer. "Start with that corner," she said, pointing. "And don't drip. We're on a budget." He grinned, dipping the brush into a can of paint. "Yes, ma'am." They worked side by side, the rhythm of their brushes syncing with the hum of activity. Joseph felt the weight of his privilege, his tailored suit swapped for a borrowed t-shirt, his hands callousing for the first time in years. Aisha's leadership was effortless. She solved a plumbing issue with a quick call, calmed a nervous volunteer with a joke, and reassured a young mother that she'd be safe here. The community was already rallying, local businesses donating food, a church offering blankets. Aisha's determination was contagious, and Joseph found himself caught in her orbit, his heart lighter than it had been since Rachel's betrayal. During a break, they sat on folding chairs outside, the autumn air crisp. Aisha sipped coffee from a chipped mug, her gaze distant. "My mother used to sketch places like this," she said, unprompted. "Shelters, community centers. She'd stay up late, drawing floor plans, talking about safe spaces for women like her. She never got to build one." Joseph leaned forward, his voice soft. "What happened to her, Aisha?" She looked at him, her eyes raw but steady. "After Rachel's company tanked our housing project, we lost everything. Eviction came fast. Mom tried to fight it, but the stress, her heart couldn't take it. She died in a shelter, not much better than this one." Her voice cracked, but she straightened. "I was 17. Learned quick how to survive. But I promised I'd make her dream real." Joseph's chest tightened, guilt and admiration warring within him. "You're doing it," he said. "You're making her proud." Aisha's lips curved, a rare vulnerability breaking through. "I hope so. But it's not just for her. It's for every woman who's been where I was." Her words hit him hard, exposing the emptiness he'd ignored for years. He'd built Kane Enterprises to prove his worth, to silence the whispers after Rachel left, but it was a hollow victory. Aisha's purpose, her fight for others, made his wealth feel like a shadow. "You're making me rethink everything," he admitted, his voice low. "I've been chasing power, but you're building something that matters." She studied him, her gaze piercing. "You're here, aren't you? That's a start." Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with a quiet intimacy. Joseph felt a pull, not just to her cause, but to her, the woman who'd turned his stunt into something real. He reached for her hand, but a volunteer interrupted, calling Aisha to sign for a delivery. She stood, her smile fleeting but warm, leaving Joseph to wonder how deep this connection could go. The shelter's progress was overshadowed by Rachel's smear campaign gaining traction. Online, the hashtag #QueenFromNowhere hashtag now carried venom, comments calling Aisha a gold digger, a fake. At a community meeting that evening, Aisha stood before local leaders, her voice steady as she pitched the shelter's mission. A few attendees whispered, phones glowing with the tabloid story. Aisha ignored them, her focus unshaken, outlining plans for job training and childcare. Joseph watched, his admiration growing, but he noticed a city councillor's skeptical frown, her pen tapping as she read the article. After the meeting, Aisha brushed off the rumors. "They can say what they want," she told Joseph, stacking chairs. "I've got work to do." He shook his head, frustrated. "You don't deserve this. Rachel's behind it. I know her." Aisha's eyes flashed. "Let her try. I've faced worse than her lies." Her resilience was afire, but Joseph felt responsible. He'd brought her into Rachel's crosshairs, and now her dream was at risk. He vowed to fix it, quietly funneling funds to cover the shelter's startup costs, beds, heaters, a new roof. He didn't tell Aisha, not wanting her to think he was buying her approval, but he worked late into the night, hauling supplies and fixing leaks, his hands learning the labor his wealth had always shielded him from. The next morning, Aisha found him repairing a wobbly table, sweat on his brow. "You're still here," she said, a mix of surprise and warmth in her voice. "Told you," he said, wiping his hands. "I'm in." Their shared laughter was cut short by a phone call. Aisha answered, her face falling. "What do you mean they pulled out?" she asked, her voice tight. Joseph stepped closer, listening as she argued with a donor's representative. The call ended, and she turned to him, her jaw set. The city's biggest donor just backed out. They're concerned about the rumors. Joseph's blood boiled, Rachel's shadow looming larger. "This stops now," he said, his voice hard. "I'll find out who's feeding this, and I'll shut it down." Aisha grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "This isn't your fight, Joseph. It's mine, and I'm not giving up." He looked into her eyes, seeing the strength that had drawn him in from that rainy night. But this time, he wasn't stepping back. Her fight was his now, too. Aisha's grip on Joseph's arm was firm, her eyes blazing with resolve. "This isn't your fight, Joseph. It's mine, and I'm not giving up." The shelter's flickering lights cast shadows across her face, the news of the major donor's withdrawal hanging heavy in the air. Rachel's smear campaign had drawn blood, threatening the dream Aisha had poured her heart into. Joseph's jaw clenched, his protective instinct flaring. He'd brought Aisha into Rachel's crosshairs, and now her shelter was at risk. He wouldn't let Rachel's lies win. Back in his office at Kane Enterprises, Joseph worked late, the city skyline a blur beyond his windows. He'd called in his best investigators, tasking them with digging into Rachel's past at Whitmore Development. If Aisha's story was true, and he had no doubt it was, there'd be evidence of Rachel's illegal cost-cutting, the kind that had left families like Aisha's on the streets. His team delivered within hours. Financial records, internal emails, and whistleblower complaints buried after the housing project's collapse. Rachel had skimmed funds, violated regulations, and covered it up with charm and payoffs. Joseph's hands shook as he read the files, anger mixing with purpose. This wasn't just about protecting Aisha. It was about exposing the truth. He met with his PR team, his voice steady but sharp. "Get this to every major outlet," he said, sliding the documents across the table. Discreetly. No trace back to me. He paused, thinking of Aisha's fire, her refusal to bow. And make sure they know who's been hurt by Rachel Whitmore's greed. Meanwhile, Aisha stood at a community center podium, the room packed with local leaders, volunteers, and curious residents. The shelter's future hung in the balance, and she'd agreed to speak at this fundraiser, her first public event since the wedding. The tabloid's con artist smear lingered, with some attendees whispering, phones glowing with the story. Aisha took a deep breath, her jeans and t-shirt a stark contrast to the velvet gown, but her presence no less commanding. She didn't need glamour, she had truth. "My name is Aisha Lawson," she began, her voice clear, cutting through the murmurs. 3 years ago, I lost everything. My mother worked for a company that promised affordable housing, but cut corners for profit. When it collapsed, we ended up on the streets. She didn't survive it. The room went silent, her words raw but steady. I've been homeless, hungry, invisible. But I'm here now, building a shelter for women like me, like her. Not for fame, not for headlines, for them. Her authenticity hit like a wave. A woman in the front row wiped tears, a counselor nodded slowly, and even the skeptics leaned forward. Aisha spoke of her mother's sketches, her vision for a safe space, and her fight to rise above the streets. "You can call me a fraud," she said, her eyes fierce, "but you can't erase what I've survived. Help me make sure no one else has to." The crowd erupted in applause, donations flooding in, small checks from locals, pledges from businesses, even a promise from the counselor to revisit funding. Aisha stepped off the podium, her heart pounding, a weight lifting. She'd shared her story, not for pity but for power, and the community responded. Joseph arrived at the community center as the event ended, carrying a box of donated supplies. He'd caught the tail end of Aisha's speech, his chest tightening at her courage. She spotted him, her smile tired but genuine. "You missed the show," she said, teasing. "Caught enough," he said, setting the box down. "You were incredible." She shrugged, but her eyes softened. "Just told the truth." They worked together to clean up, stacking chairs and sorting donations. Their partnership felt seamless, a blend of mutual respect and unspoken feelings. Joseph handed her a water bottle, their fingers brushing, and he felt a spark he couldn't ignore. "You're doing more than building a shelter," he said. "You're changing people." Aisha met his gaze, her voice quiet. "And you're here, Joseph. That's changing you." He nodded, the truth settling deep. He'd spent years chasing wealth, status, revenge. But working beside Aisha, seeing her fight for others, gave him a purpose he'd never known. Their hands brushed again as they moved a table, and he let the moment linger, their connection a quiet promise. The next morning, the media exploded with Joseph's findings. Headlines screamed, "Whitmore Development Scandal Uncovered, Illegal Practices Exposed." Articles detailed Rachel's cost-cutting, naming families like Aisha's who'd suffered. The smear campaign against Aisha crumbled, the public turning on Rachel as her hypocrisy was laid bare. Social media shifted. #QueenFromNowhere, now a rallying cry for justice. Rachel's reputation tanked, her wedding glow replaced by scrutiny, her new husband distancing himself in damage control. At the shelter, Aisha read the news on a volunteer's phone, her expression unreadable. "You did this," she said to Joseph, who was fixing a shelf nearby. He shrugged, wiping sawdust from his hands. "You deserve the truth to come out." She studied him, a mix of gratitude and caution. "You didn't have to fight my battle." "It's our battle," he said, his voice firm. "I'm in this with you." Her smile was small but real, a bridge between them strengthening. They returned to work, their teamwork a quiet dance. Joseph hauling supplies, Aisha directing volunteers, their shared purpose binding them closer. But as the day ended, Joseph stood alone outside the shelter, the city's hum fading into the background. He replayed Aisha's speech, her touch, her fire. His heart raced, not with the thrill of exposing Rachel, but with a realization he couldn't shake. His feelings for Aisha were deeper than admiration, deeper than partnership. He was falling for her, and it terrified him. Joseph stood alone outside the shelter, the city's hum fading as Aisha's fire burned in his mind. Her speech, her touch, her unyielding strength. His heart raced, not with the thrill of exposing Rachel, but with a truth he could no longer deny. He was falling for Aisha, and it terrified him. The shelter's modest storefront glowed behind him, a beacon of her purpose, and he knew he wanted to be part of it. Not just her mission, but her life. As the autumn night settled, he made a silent vow. He'd show her, not with wealth, but with everything he was. Months later, the shelter had transformed into a thriving foundation. Its grand opening fundraiser, filling a rented community hall with light and hope. Strings of fairy lights draped the ceiling, tables overflowed with donated food, and volunteers mingled with donors, their laughter a testament to Aisha's vision. The once crumbling storefront was now a haven. Clean walls, warm beds, a kitchen serving hot meals to women rebuilding their lives. Aisha, now the foundation's director, moved through the crowd in a simple navy dress, her presence commanding yet warm, greeting each guest by name. Joseph watched from a corner, his tailored suit swapped for a sweater, his role as the foundation's biggest donor known but understated. He'd funded new programs, job training, counseling, childcare, but it was Aisha's leadership that made the shelter a home. The crowd buzzed with admiration, local leaders praising Aisha's work. The hashtag #QueenFromNowhere hashtag, now a symbol of resilience. Rachel's smear campaign had collapsed under the weight of her exposed hypocrisy, her reputation in tatters, while Aisha's star rose. Joseph felt a quiet pride, not in his role but in hers. She'd turned his impulsive plan into a movement, and he was no longer the billionaire seeking revenge. He was a man finding purpose. As the fundraiser reached its peak, Aisha took the stage, her voice steady. "This foundation isn't about me," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about every woman who's been told she's invisible, every dream that's been buried. We're here to rebuild together." The crowd erupted in applause, and Joseph's chest swelled, her courage a mirror to his own transformation. He'd spent years chasing power, but Aisha had shown him what true worth meant. When the applause faded, Joseph stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Can I say something?" he asked, his voice cutting through the hum. Aisha raised an eyebrow, a playful spark in her eyes, and nodded. He took the stage, the crowd quieting, their curiosity palpable. He cleared his throat, his gaze locking onto Aisha's. "I came to this city a man who thought wealth defined him," he began, his voice raw but clear. 3 years ago, I was broken, chasing revenge, thinking it would fix me. Then I met someone who changed everything." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Aisha Lawson showed me that value isn't in money or status. It's in courage, in fighting for what's right. This foundation exists because of her, because she rose from nothing and built something extraordinary." The crowd murmured, moved, but Joseph's focus was on Aisha, her eyes widening, a mix of surprise and warmth. "I've learned more from you than I can ever repay," he continued, stepping off the stage, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And I want to spend the rest of my life proving I see your worth. Not as a savior, not as a billionaire, but as a man who loves you." The room went silent as he knelt before her, a simple ring in his hand, its understated beauty a reflection of their journey. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Aisha's eyes held his, tears glistening, but her expression steady. "Aisha Lawson," he said. Will you marry me? Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. She stepped closer, her voice low, meant only for him. You don't have to fix the past, Joseph, she said, her tone cautious but soft. You don't owe me this. I'm not, he said, his voice unwavering. I'm building a future. With you, if you'll have me. Aisha's lips curved, a tear slipping down her cheek. Then yes, she said, her voice breaking with a laugh. But only if we're equals, partners, not a fairy tale. He rose, sliding the ring onto her finger, and the crowd erupted, cheers echoing through the hall. Joseph pulled her close, their embrace a promise, their connection rooted in respect and love. Aisha's laugh was warm against his shoulder, and he felt whole for the first time in years. Months later, the shelter expanded, new branches opening across the city, each one a testament to Aisha's vision and their shared work. Joseph and Aisha ran it together, their partnership a blend of her fire and his quiet support. They trained staff, secured grants, and welcomed women seeking refuge, their hands often brushing as they passed tools or files, their smiles a private language. Rachel's scandal faded into irrelevance, her name a footnote against Aisha's triumph. One evening, they stood outside the original shelter, its sign now polished, Grace Lawson Haven. The city hummed around them, but the moment was theirs. Aisha leaned against the wall, her engagement ring catching the streetlight. From a rainy bus stop to this, she said, her voice soft, reflective. Didn't see that coming. Joseph smiled, taking her hand. Neither did I. But you changed everything. She looked at him, her eyes fierce but warm. We changed it together. They stood in silence, hands entwined, the shelter's light spilling onto the sidewalk. It wasn't wealth or status that defined them. It was the strength to rise, to forgive, to rebuild. From a billionaire's whim to a shared vision, they'd found true worth, not in the world's eyes, but in each other's.